Today, we've got two guests on who saw their fantasy baseball teams have a whole lot more success than the on-field, real-life Baltimore Orioles in 2025. We're going to talk about all of that coming up on today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025, and welcome back in to the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. We've got a couple of guests today, if you're watching here on YouTube, that you see we will introduce in just a second. But first, today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the FanDuel app today. So on today's episode, we're doing something a little bit different, and this is somewhat reward for a couple of our fantasy baseball winners and somewhat a good chance to just kind of get some other perspectives on what in the world is going on with the Orioles right now. So we've got Bo Harris and Jason Weisbecker on the show, two of our three Locked On Orioles fantasy baseball champions from this year. Started it up this season, got three giant leagues going. Thank you to everyone out there who played, including Samuel, who was our other winner, who I think we're going to get on a future episode. But the big prize of the win was to, join me here and be part of an episode here on Locked On Orioles, talk a little bit of ball. So, Bo and Jason, first of all, congratulations on your wins, and thank you so much for hopping on the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Connor. Thanks so much for having us on. It's an absolute dream come true. Me and my son listen to you every morning.
Yeah, absolutely, Connor. I do appreciate you doing this for us. I know you've been on our show. If I could do a quick shameless plug to Dad Bod's Crab Cakes and Sports. So anybody out there that wants to get a little Maryland feel into your sports, in addition to Connor, give us a like and a follow on anywhere you get your podcast. But we've had Connor on a couple times. It's always a good time.
Yeah, I think I've had 2 appearances over there, Jason, I believe. Bo, do you have any shameless plugs for us? Now's the opening. Now's the time.
No, I think I'll skip right past it and shamefully brag about my fantasy team.
There we go. So that is where we want to start. Now we're going to talk Orioles. We're going to talk, kind of some thoughts about this 2025 season. We're going to talk about what the O's need to do this offseason to make sure this doesn't happen again. But I want to talk about your teams first. So I'm going to start with Jason because the fact that he finished with a 19-1 record. We went with the head-to-head league this year. Jason lost once, and I believe, Jason, did you lose in week 2? I believe you ended the year with 18 consecutive victories, leading yourself all the way to the title in the Locked On Orioles Listeners League. You had a pretty straightforward run to win this thing. Your team has, Kyle Tucker, somebody everybody would have drafted, or Trey Turner, somebody who everybody, Hunter Green had an amazing year. But I think the most fun thing about fantasy baseball leagues is the guy you kind of pick up along the way. So who are the guys who kind of ended on your team who you felt like at the beginning of the season weren't even on the radar, weren't even on the team, who kind of helped you the most in this fantasy season?
I think the number one guy for me was when the A's called up Nick Hertz. And I was able to pick him up right away and wasn't really sure how it would go. I might have actually even dropped him temporarily and then picked him right back up. But he was red hot. I mean, over 30 home runs. I mean, clear-cut rookie of the year, I'm pretty sure. It's for me, that was probably my number one guy. And then the rest of the pickups during the year that I made were more of a, like we were talking about before we got on air, the streaming as far as the pitching goes. I mean, I didn't pick a pitcher until round 7, and it was DeGrom, stayed on my roster all year long, as well as Strider up until the last week. And then I just picked up about 3 or 4 different guys a night, and that really, I didn't start employing that till week 3. Hence the loss in week 2. But having all those pitchers go early, that's what worked for me.
Yeah, I was saying to Bo before we got on, I was like, you had to have picked up some pitchers late. And then I realized when I was looking at your roster, it was even more so, Jason. I mean, by the end of the year, I looked at your pitchers you had in there for the championship round when you won. And is there anyone on this group who was still, I'm kind of showing it here if you're watching on YouTube, Mitch Ferris, Colin Ray, Davis Martin, Andrew Alvarez, Bubba Chandler, Kaiwei Tang, and Aaron Savali. Did you draft any of those pitchers, or were they all pickups by the end of the year?
That's actually not my team, Connor, unfortunately.
Am I flipping teams here? Am I flipping teams here?
Mine was the Why Not Orioles.
Well, either way, we'll pretend like that didn't happen. And who was on your team then by the end of the season?
Bubba Chandler, Mitch Ferris, Martin from the White Sox, Colin Ray, Aaron Savali, all these players like that. And those were like pickups. Some of them were pickups the night before for Sunday to end the year.
Now, Bo, you did not have the 19-1 season, but that is okay. 14-6 still got you a championship this year. I guess we can start with Nick Kurtz because that was the biggest crossover between the two teams. Is Nick Kurtz kind of leading the way? Was that a draft pick or was that a pickup for you? I can't imagine it was a draft pick, although I guess it's possible.
Yeah, so I got really lucky. I picked up Kurtz and then dropped him when he had the injury. I think it was early August, late July. He was down for like 2 or 3 weeks. And I think I actually picked him up once the playoffs started because somebody else was streaming pitchers, and I carried him the last couple of weeks. And it was a big add-on last 2 weeks.
In the I think I was looking at Bo's team. I was talking about Jason's team. Bo, you had the Hunter Green, you had the Michael King, who did eventually come back. But what I found interesting about your roster by the end, was it a fully streaming decision? Because you were, I believe, all relief pitchers except for Hunter Green at the end of the year. So is that just what it came down to on the final day to try and win, or were you carrying a lot of relievers for most of the year?
No, I was mostly carrying starters throughout the year. But when I looked at the last couple of games, once again, maybe it was a little over strategizing. But I thought, hey, these guys aren't going to pitch again before the end of the season. So what can I do to maximize the slots to get points? And I have to say, going through the last 3 weeks of the playoffs there, I mean, there were some guys that had great teams, like Jordan Westberg's mattress team, Stewie. He was like 18-2 this year and was just phenomenal. I think also Manny Alexander's. I think we had to really push hard to try to get through some of those playoff games. So I just pulling out all the stops.
Yeah, so here's Bo's pitchers by the end, as you can see. Hunter Green, if you're watching on YouTube, and then a whole bunch of relief pitchers helping him out there on the last couple of days. So who were the starters, the non-Hunter Green starters that carried you there before you? Again, it's not a keeper league, so you can kind of let them loose on the final day. Who helped get you there that were really on the team pitching wise?
Yeah, from a pitching standpoint, Connor, I mean, it really was a rotating door. Much like Jason, I waited on pitchers, really stacked the offense, and got really lucky that a lot of those performers I picked up stayed healthy all year. That's really was the strength of the team, and there was a lot of pitcher streaming. There were a couple of guys that were strong for me for a matter of time. Like you mentioned, Hunter Green, he dealt with his injuries, but he was good when he was in. Same thing with Shota, missed a lot of time, but beginning of the season he was solid. But really, strength of the team was the offense.
Yeah, so I got I got to show this pitching staff again. I just got to show it again. Jason's pitching staff at the end of the year. It makes me, I mean, I will say I watch an absurd amount of baseball. I know an absurd amount of players. My wife is like, you need to get that looked at, how many players that are in your brain and walking around at all times. I send pictures to my friends of my immaculate grid plays when the Orioles are on it, like today. And I had to do a double check on Mitch Ferris and Andrew Alvarez because I was pretty sure I knew who they were. But then again, I was like, those could be made up names. It was good to know that they were not. I believe here is Jason's actual team. We were showing up here hitter wise. Nick Kurtz was doing a lot of work there. It was kind of a breakout Joe Adell season. He still wasn't an amazing hitter, but he popped 30 plus homers. I love that you held on to Jordan Westberg. Didn't get a lot of games out of him this year, but certainly utilized an IL spot. Ellie stole a bunch of bags, though he wasn't the same hitter that was thought. And you got a couple of guys on your team who are still playing baseball, at least as of this recording here on Monday night, with Jorge Polanco and Alejandro Kirk and Julio Rodriguez. On the other side, batters for Bo this season, we already mentioned Nick Kurtz. I mean, Ramon Laureano, that was somebody who helped out the Orioles a whole bunch this season, was on this team, was good in San Diego as well, being able to have Churio, having Caminero. This team that definitely skews to the younger side for chunks of it as well, with Nick Kurtz and Bryce Terang, and then his pitching staff that I had mentioned already. So you guys are the champions. We've done a lot of talking about how great your teams have been. I do want to flip it before we kind of turn it over to Orioles side. We can start with Bo. Was there anybody that either stayed on the team because he was at least good enough, or that you drafted and got rid of, where it was like, this was my biggest fantasy baseball bust from this season?
Gosh, biggest fantasy baseball bust. Let me think. Probably. Gosh, why don't I pass to Jason? I'm having a hard time thinking what bust is, Jason. Hard when you're a winner.
So one of my busts, like, it was actually the second pitcher I took, but it was an injury, so I don't know if that's really a bust. But Spencer Schwellenbeck, I was real high on this year, and him going down with the injury early on. And then Jake Berger was one that I was real high on early on, and I ended up dropping him during the year just because he was down and they got sent back down to the minors. And I think, Francisco Alvarez as well. And then his injury early in the year kind of derailed that for me. But because I didn't take a catcher until the second round on that one as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably, going back and getting your answer here for you, Connor, maybe Michael King. That was my second pitcher I took, and obviously he played like 30 innings this year. So,
yeah, I will, just to give myself a small amount of credit. In the Locked On Orioles Listeners League that Bo won, I did finish with a better record than Bo at 15-5, and did suffer a absolute dud performance in the first round of the playoffs. To the surprise of no one. You're thinking, Connor, how did your team make it all the way, go 15-5 and have such good of a record? I did indeed draft Tarek Skubal, Paul Skeens, Hunter Brown, and Christopher Sanchez all on my team. So that was helpful. I went for the starting pitching heavy. It got me there, and then they didn't line up with double start weeks in the playoffs, and my season was over. Much like the Orioles, though, actually made the playoffs this year. That is where I want to get to next. We got 3 Orioles fans here. It was a bit of a disappointing season. Let's talk about kind of the thoughts around this team heading into the offseason and beyond. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Monarch. Now, let's be honest. Most of us can't name all of our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, saving, investments, it's easy to lose track. And that can mean, well, you might leave some money on the table in that entire process. So that's why I started using Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. For me, Monarch really helps me and my wife kind of managing that same money, those same finances, and help with the planning as well. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Every day we make decisions, but on Prize Picks, being right can actually get you paid. Don't miss the excitement of this football season with Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. Playing Prize Picks is such a fun and simple way to add more excitement to football. You pick more or less on player projections like Josh Allen passing yards or Saquon Barkley rushing for a touchdown, and you are in the game. And they got a brand new injury reboot feature. If your player leaves early and doesn't return, it won't count against you. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. And that's at Prize Picks. It's good to be right. So let's talk a little bit about this Orioles season. We got Bo Harris here. We got Jason Weisbecker here, 2 of our Locked On Orioles fantasy baseball winners from this season. Jason, you talk a little bit in the podcast realm as well about the Orioles and other things on your show. Just kind of the raw reaction where you all are at here in October. We are recording here. Game 7 of the ALCS just kicked off. It is a little tough, I think, to watch the Blue Jays in that spot because it feels like with it being this Toronto team, it could very easily be the Orioles who are in this spot right now. I'll start with you, Jason. Just kind of, we're almost a month out from the regular season being over, and I feel like we're like 4 months out from the realization that the Orioles season was kind of over. Like, before getting into what they need to do this offseason, just from the fandom perspective, where do you find yourself in your Orioles headspace at the moment?
Disappointed still, but jealous, but then optimistic as well. If you look at some of these teams that made it the playoffs, and even Toronto and Seattle, both of those teams missed out on the playoffs last year. And they had a 1-year reset because Seattle made it that year before. They had a 1-year reset where they were all sellers during the trade deadline, and now they're playing the ALCS. Same thing with the Cubs on the NL side. So to me, I'm very optimistic because this team still has a lot of pieces in place. But again, obviously, still disappointed that we're not one of the last 3 teams left.
Bo, where do you fall at this point? Again, it is less than a month since the season ended, but I mean, I was getting feelings in probably around when they fired Brandon Hyde that I was like, this might not be going well. So I felt like there was a lot of time to process it. But where's the headspace? Because we're really in the nothing going on space for the Orioles because you can't make any moves yet. They haven't hired a manager yet, but there's no actual baseball games going on at this point either.
Yeah, I feel like I'm already shifting into optimism about next year. There's such a young core of talent here, and I think the team's done a good job of accumulating young players. Obviously, the cookie has crumbled the wrong way from a health perspective, at least over this last season. So I think I've shifted to optimism. Some of that is I feel like every year during the baseball season, if a season goes like last year did, I start getting excited about football come August, September. And it's a little early to start getting excited about baseball, but I kind of am already based on the way the football team's been playing. So,
yeah. Jason, are you a Ravens fan?
I am.
Yes, yeah, I know Bo's a Commanders fan, so neither of the Pro Bowl quarterbacks are currently healthy enough to be on the field. That we will see how that continues, but you can have some optimism for baseball. I mean, did you both feel like when they fired Brandon Hyde back in May, there was obviously time to turn it around? Like, yes, they were 15-28. It was a disaster, but we were mid-May. You've got 4.5 months of the baseball season remaining with a lot of talent on the roster, but it became pretty clear shortly after the firing. The Orioles they lost like 5 or 6 in a row after that as well, before Tony Mansolino got his first win. Like, back to you, Jason. When do you feel like was the moment where you in your brain, even though you wanted to hold on to a small amount of hope, like, was there a point in the season where you were like, wow, this is really happening? Like, this team is not only probably going to miss the playoffs, they're probably going to finish with a losing record, and this is going to be a bad season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Connor. I was right about the Brandon Hyde being fired, where it just seems like they had too many warts already going up to that point that no matter what they did, they weren't going to be able to correct it, and they weren't going to be buyers during the trade deadline, so that wasn't going to change. I think the realization just kind of clicked in for all of us and the organization that this is going to be the year that you might have to just take it on the chin.
But was there any hope beyond the Hyde firing, or was that the nail in the coffin?
It's such a long season, and I'm a glass half full kind of guy, but I think the season, I knew it was over when they went up 8-0 against Tampa Bay in Tampa, and then didn't hold that lead. And I felt like that all the air left the balloon at that point.
It was, I think that was a June game, maybe. It was that hot. That was that second Trevor Rogers start. And that was really until that final game in Yankee Stadium. That was the only other quote unquote bad start he had all year. It looked like it was 200% humidity down there. He was sweating bullets. He didn't even finish the third inning. He wasn't getting any calls. And man, I think was it a grand slam that tied the game, or maybe a 2 or 3 run homer or something like that tied the game in and that was the thing. It didn't take till the 8th or 9th. I think the Rays tied the game in like the 5th inning after having an 8-0 lead. And it was just like, I think that's another good marker of the season, because that was up there for worst loss of a season that had definitely a bunch of rough ones. I mean, we could go everywhere about what went wrong. I think it's pretty clear early on they had 0 starting pitching, and then as they fixed that, the offense was asleep. And you combine that for the rest of the season, and you're going to win 75 games. I think Trevor Rogers is the too easy answer to this question of what is the biggest positive you take out of this season. That's too much of a cop-out answer. So, Jason, just kind of from the perspective of someone who's watched this team, this franchise for a while, Rogers is really one of the only guys who played over his skis this year. So the non-Trevor Rogers division, what do you take as the thing you hold on to from 2025?
I think seeing Dylan Bieber come in and step in right away like he belongs there was a big surprise for me, because coming into this year, he was on the prospect list. He was in the conversation, but he wasn't a top 100 prospect by any means. And Really, he had a great year. And even more impressive to me was the fact that he stepped in right away for a team that wanted to see what the future was like. And I think he might have put himself in the conversation to be an everyday player next year.
Bo, who was the what's the one thing you could hold on to? Because I'll tell you, for me, I don't want to remember much out of this season. I will remember Trevor Rogers and what's one other thing.
I think Beavers is the right answer, Jason. Absolutely. If I had to say a runner-up, I would probably say how strong Westberg looked when he was on the field this year. He obviously battled through more injuries again this year, but when he was out there, I think that he is that third baseman that we can build around, and I think that's something we can take in the next year.
Yeah, I would just say two really late season things. Even though he wasn't amazing, just to see Basayo A have some cool moments and B get the extension. Like, I was at the point where I thought they were never going to give out an extension to any of these guys, and I think it opened the door a little bit to say, all right, Mike Elias has probably been offering these extensions, and it's probably smart for a player like Gunnar Henderson to not take 8 years, $70 million, because he knows he's going to make a whole lot more than that. But it's good to know that Elias is willing to do that. And I think the other thing for me, because I've been such a fan of this guy since he's been in the minor leagues, is how good Kyle Bradish looked coming back from Tommy John surgery. I think that's one of my number one optimism things heading into next year, is that he really looked like his top 5 Cy Young finisher self from 2023. And sometimes it takes guys a while, and maybe it will at the beginning of next year, but it really didn't take him. I mean, that first start back, he looked really good. So that was certainly nice to see. So that kind of transitions us to the final thing I want to talk about. A little optimism for next year, but I think we're all in agreement that the Orioles can't just run it back with this group next year and expect things to get a whole lot better. There's going to need to be some additions. We're going to talk about what we'd all love to see from this Orioles offseason to finish off the show coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Now, FanDuel's great because it gives you so many ways to play. You can build parlays, try player props, and even follow the live lines during the games. And when your quarterback's hurt or you really don't want to watch your 1-5 team anymore, it makes watching football a little more exciting when you have something riding on the action. So whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Rugiet. Now, making excuses, it doesn't solve anything. But sometimes your body just needs a little extra support, and that's where Rugiet comes in. Rugiet.com offers fast-acting, doctor-prescribed treatments for ED, designed to help you stop making excuses and start making moves. And if prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly straight to your door. The process is fast, simple, and private. It's all handled by real doctors. So visit rugiet.com/yak to get 15% off your first order. That's rugiet.com/YAK. And don't forget to use our code LOCKEDONMLB so they know we sent you. Rugiet, stop making excuses and start making moves. Yeah, that's some pretty good advice for the Orioles right there. Stop making excuses and start making moves. That is what a beautiful transition from our last ad sponsor to talk about how we want to finish off this show. The Orioles need to add this offseason. I don't think it needs to be the greatest offseason in human history, but they need to spend a little money, make a couple deals, and improve this team going into next year. Now, what I've talked about so far this offseason on the show is that my kind of ideal offseason is 2 starters, 2 relievers, and a bat that you can play most to every day. Now, it would be nice for a Kyle Schwarber type to be here, but a bat who you can count on, a Ramon Laureano production type bat to be in this lineup. But I asked you guys, told you before the show, hey, let's talk a little bit about like what a dream offseason would look like. Kind of left it open-ended, whether you want to identify specific players or just needs to the team. So we'll start with Jason, because I'm sure you guys have been talking about that over on your show anyway for the last couple of weeks, or maybe even more, because as the season got into a grind, it was just easier to talk about what comes in the offseason. So what does a dream Orioles offseason look like for you, Jason?
Oh, man. I have a whole list of guys here, but I think
we're going to sign 20 players. They're going to replace everybody.
Right. I think the most important thing and everyone's going to pinpoint the starting pitching, but if everything pans out the way that it ended this year, you have a good 1-2 punch with Bradish and Rogers. I think the attention to a veteran hitter that can also protect the lineup as is. So make Gunnar better, make Adley better, make Jordan Westberg better, etc. But I do think it's important they go after one of the big names. I mean, Kyle Tucker would be great. That's the number one on everyone's list for every other major league team. So I don't know how realistic that is, but like an Alex Bregman type or Kyle Schwarber, like you said, Cody Bellinger, I'm starting to kind of come around on, or I'm wondering how much he's propped up by the best hitter on the planet in the American League, besides Shohei Ohtani in the National League, with Aaron Judge. So to me, I think like Alex Bregman would be great, someone like that, just to bat 3 or 4 or Schwarber. And then on the pitching side, you definitely get one of the aces out there, whether it's Cease, Valdez, or most intriguing is Bo's stud fantasy player, Michael King. Like, I really like Michael King, but I also like Zach Allen. Like, I think they need 2 pitchers, a big guy and like maybe a Merrill Kelly, something like that. That's at least what I would hope.
Bo, what are we thinking? What would make you happy we get to spring training and what new kind of faces are walking into Sarasota?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things I'd like to see this offseason. I think at the very top of the priority list isn't actually a player. I would like for there to be no pre-spring training conferences where Mike Elias comes out and says, these guys are injured. It seems like back-to-back years now there's been huge announcements like January, February timeframe where it's like, oh, shot across the bow. We're not going to have Bradish or Rodriguez is out indefinitely. Like those are just huge news conferences that my dream offseason would be none of those. But on the player front, I might be a little bit more kind of swinging lower and less dream scenario, more realistic. But I'd love to see Ramon Laureano come back. I think that he's a great compliment to some of the young talent they have here. It doesn't, to Jason's point, protect, your bats like Gunnar and kind of, I think, maybe beef up the lineup as much. But when I think about the quality he brought, especially the howitzer he has hanging off his right shoulder, I think that he brings a lot of tools that this team really needs and some flexibility, especially when you might need it, assuming Tyler O'Neill opts in. I think the last thing is just to try not to copy Jason because he's got a lot of good points there. Is I'd love to see if there's a controllable starting pitcher out there. I just feel like paying a premium for 30, 40 mil a year is probably going to be the going rate for those top pitchers that are out there. And gosh, I don't know if Joe Ryan is somebody that they could potentially trade for that's got some control left. You'd have to give up a lot. But if we got 2 years of Joe Ryan in the last 2 years of his arbitration, that might be a little better on the salary cap and maybe gives us some cash to go after a Bellinger or a Schwarber.
Yeah, Joe Ryan, I mean, he kind of put everything together finally this year for Minnesota. It just went under the radar because, I mean, if you thought the Orioles season went poorly, take a look at what happened in Minneapolis this year. And it really did go under the radar. And they were going to sell, then the ownership's not going to sell. They trade more guys than the Orioles did at the deadline. They might be really tearing it down this offseason. And I think the Orioles, whether it be Ryan, whether it be Pablo Lopez, I mean, he really loves Minnesota, but would Byron Buxton look around him and be like, maybe I would waive my no trade if I could go to a team that's actually going to win, would certainly be possible. Other thing to ask, I've gotten like some mixed responses on this one. I've been asking people because on one hand, relievers are easy to find. We've seen how Mike Elias has built these bullpens the past couple of years, waivers, minor league deals, guys who pop finally, failed starters, whatever it may be. But the Orioles did pay for a closer in Craig Kimbrell when they didn't have Bautista. They're not going to have Bautista again. Would either of you guys give out like a serious multi-year contract? I'm not talking a 1 year to a late 30s Craig Kimbrell. I'm talking a serious, 3-4 year deal to a legitimate in his prime closer for this team, or would you rather spend that money elsewhere?
I mean, I'll go first. I think that would be a smart place to stash some money to be able to spend some money to try to button up the back end of the bullpen. I think there's some great arms that aren't quite ready yet on the farm, but I mean, I'd hate to think that you can't finish off games in 2026 and that becomes the Achilles heel.
Yeah, I would pay a closer. I don't think though that you're gonna necessarily go as expensive as everyone may think, because I don't think they're going to be in the market for Diaz with the Mets. I think it's more like my number one target. My co-host Mike and I mean, we were pounding the desk for Devin Williams. I think a change of scenery out of the Big Apple will make him just like he was back in Milwaukee. Plus, a year coming off that pretty gruesome injury that he had. So I think that would, if you're going to throw some money somewhere, that'd be a good place to start.
Yeah, I definitely love the Devin Williams. I think they need to add a bat. We'll see, but I think we all know they're going to add starting pitching. I think the question really just is it going to be the 1 or 2 year deal types, or are they going to finally, kind of take that next step, whether it is for a trade, right? If you go get Joe Ryan, it's a different way to get a really good starting pitcher, but they got to get somebody to add into their rotation, because as they learned last year, it doesn't matter what you do afterwards. If you start 15 and 28 because you can't get anyone out, it's going to be a rough season for you. Bo, Jason, thank you so much for joining the show. One final time, congratulations to each of you on your fantasy baseball championships. Hopefully planning to run those leagues back in 2026, and certainly we'll let the defending champs get first dibs on some of those spots in those leagues. So we're happy to have both of you back. But Bo and Jason, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. We will be back tomorrow. Maybe the O's will have a manager by then. Maybe it will be Albert Pujols. Probably not. But either way, we got a new episode of Locked On Orioles. Until then, that's Bo and Jason. I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.